Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to If Data Could Talk. I am Andy Cotgreave, Technical Evangelist at Tableau. Today, we have Corinna Turbes with us. She is Policy Director at Data Foundation. What's the Data Foundation, you're asking? Yes, I'm sure you are. It's a non-profit organization based in DC, and they're seeking to improve government and society by using data to inform public decision-making and policy-making. Sounds brilliant. So that's why Corinna's here, to give us a bit more detail. Obviously, we've got a new administration in the US, always a time for opportunity and change. So with that, let's meet Corinna. Corinna, how are you today?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you here on the show today. So we're going to dive straight in and talk about the new administration and some of the challenges they face. So you're working out there in DC, you're in there. You know, Biden's got his new administration. What are the big challenges they face?
Well, I think probably the same challenges that no one would be surprised by, the sort of twin challenge of the public health crisis with COVID, as well as the economic crisis, both of which are really going to rely on making sure that we have accurate and timely data to inform interventions, service delivery, how we want to target COVID relief that we do that. Those are some really big unanswered questions, and the data infrastructure that we have in place can really be improved to make sure that we have the best data possible to make sure that our policies are evidence-based.
It's fantastic. So let's go. We can break this down in many ways. The data infrastructure, I mean, at a government level, that's obviously enormous, right? We have lots of people watching that they're managing big data infrastructures too. What kind of things do they need to work on immediately to help improve that?
So one of the big challenges that we have in the US is that our federal data infrastructure is really decentralized. Other countries have a more centralized system, but for a variety of reasons, some good, some challenging, we have this very decentralized system that our federal system relies on reporting in from states, and then the federal government reports out public use data. That really presents some challenges of access. So as, say, you're a researcher in a state wanting to know about your unemployment and how much policies that you're putting forward are working, and you might want to compare that to your neighboring state. If you're looking for, vaccine rates or death rates or all of these different issues, they can be really hard to find. So one of the most immediate things that we could do is to establish a data service that would allow federal data assets to be accessed and shared in a privacy protected way. And when you do that, researchers have more insight, can create better evidence, and really break down some of those silos that prevent good quality research from coming out in a timely manner.
It's incredible. The more I learn about the federal government of the US, and we've had a few guests on talking about this topic, it just echoes business, right? Because an organization could be decentralized. They could say, off you go, every department do your own thing and be independent. Or I will dictate everything and we'll centralize everything. So it's a reflection of the challenge that many organizations face. And then the nitty-gritty of creating a data service, it's not really glamorous, is it? But it is fundamental, right? And are you seeing that change?
Yeah, I think a lot of things about data are not necessarily glamorous. You can really compare it to physical infrastructure, right? It's very exciting when you build a new bridge or you do all of these kind of large scale projects, but when it comes to maintaining, investing in, it becomes kind of a less sexy topic, but it really is so important to keeping good governance going. So when you have a topic like a national secure data service come up, there's kind of a lot of questions around, is this worth it? What's it for? But for a really minimal investment, it can really improve the quality of our data. But it does, and it has received a lot more interest in recent years, a lot of bipartisan efforts around evidence-based policymaking have really recommended this. And it's not a simple topic, but we are seeing a lot more movement around it. And hopefully we can see some good momentum on that coming forward with the new Congress and the new administration.
And if I'm right, was there a big new body set up recently about data evidence policy making in the last administration? Am I right?
Yes. So Congress in 2017 established the Commission on Evidence-Based Policymaking, and they put forward unanimous bipartisan recommendations, which included this National Secure Data Service.
Right.
Congress then picked up a lot of those recommendations and passed the Foundations for Evidence-Based Policymaking Act, which then established the Advisory Council for Data for Evidence Building, which is looking at these topics as we speak. Additionally, the Trump administration put forward the federal data strategy, which was a 10-year plan to how best leverage data in the federal government as a strategic asset. And we're seeing a lot of language coming out of the Biden administration that we hope will continue that momentum of using data strategically as we seek to make evidence-based policy. So there's just a lot of bipartisan support, and I think a lot of federal government agencies really seeing the value in using data and sharing data.
That's fantastic. Did you see Biden's executive order on a data-driven response to COVID-19?
I did, yes.
Yeah, that one. So one of his first executive orders, for those who don't know, was here is what we need to do to make a data-driven response to COVID-19. And when I read it, I was like, you know what? I could just take out all the presidential words and give that to any CEO of any organization and go, if you want a data culture, this is what you do, because the leadership from the top about bringing departments together, assigning responsibility, everything you've just said the government's been doing in the last 5 years. I was like, oh, it's great. Do you have any more background on that executive order or
we were very excited to see it, and we know that the transition teams were reaching out into a lot of different stakeholders to try and make that as meaningful and as impactful as possible. So we were very glad to see that come out, and think that a lot of, especially the data standards and the data sharing, will be really important, especially since, as I mentioned, all of the states are reporting in data in their own way and fashion. So really seeing that strong leadership from the federal government will be great.
Great. So let's zoom in a little bit to the dirty data, or the actual challenges of the data itself, because obviously we've got this great sort of institutional movement, but then once you get down and dirty, you think, okay, how do we fix this? So I guess what are some of the data challenges that we've seen as a result of the pandemic, maybe in terms of longitudinal data or the way data is aggregated, and how that makes the specific challenges?
So I think one of the really great examples of how the pandemic has impacted our federal data is if you look at the education system. The National Center for Education Statistics issues what's called the National Report Card, which is assessments nationwide of students in grades 4 and 8, I believe, but they've had to cancel that collection until 2022. So as we think about, this is a collection that has been going since 1967 and has had really incredible value in looking at longitudinal progress. So as we think about questions of what is distance learning, school suspensions going to do to our students, we're going to have this, this blip in our longitudinal data that we have to think really strategically about how we're going to analyze it, adapt to that. And much to the Department of Education's credit, they have recently introduced a school pulse survey, which is a rapid deployment of a survey that will interview schools and districts about their mitigation behavior. So hopefully then we can get a sense of what these interventions are doing to students and can help inform that longitudinal data studies that we have with the nation's report card. It is really important that that school pulse survey be disaggregated by race, that it considers ethnicity, language learning status, school lunch status, and all of these other markers to make sure that we know how these are affecting equity concerns going forward. And that is yet another thing that we're seeing out of the Biden administration, is a focus on making sure we have appropriate disaggregated data to really get the complete picture of how equity is being affected by this pandemic.
That's now I'm going to do a little spoiler but at the end of the show we do what you're reading, what we're each reading, and the book you're reading has a lot to say on what we choose to measure, and that's a really serious issue. So
yeah, so stay tuned.
Stay tuned, because it's a very good book. And what about transparency? I think it's all very well collecting data. If we can get the right levels, that's great. If we can cope with the longitudinal changes, even better. But if I hide the data, is that how has trust and data been seen to be good and bad in the last year and going ahead into the future?
And trust and transparency are such complicated issues. I come from an organization that really focused on the federal statistical system, which is highly trusted public data. You think about the jobs numbers, which are produced by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, even the Census Bureau, and their transparency and independence is really contributing to trust. And they've kind of suffered some hard knocks recently. Mm-hmm. But, these are such important parts of how we govern ourselves, how we organize our society, that when Biden issued a presidential memorandum on restoring trust in data, we were also so elated to see that. It really mimicked some of the themes that we saw in the federal data strategy, but also emphasized this importance of trust and transparency. So there is a really important part of transparency that says how the data was gathered, how it's being published, what it's being used for, both from the data user side, as well as the people who are giving their data. And all of these things really are wrapped up in good public communication, that we are, explaining what we're doing, why we're doing it, how it's happening, both from the what we can do and what we can't do perspective. So what are the limitations of this data? What are, what you can and cannot do with it? So, as well as just the real meaningful privacy concerns, that privacy and confidentiality are taken seriously and how they're being taken seriously.
Yeah, and I think I think that's where one of the differences in terms of levels of accountability to a government and to maybe a private organization is where maybe the challenges diverge, right? Transparency for a government level seems to me is paramount, but the privacy is a really big challenge, because they seem two sides of a similar coin.
And that's kind of where the government as corporation kind of breaks down, is because the government has different civil rights obligations to information and privacy than maybe a data company or a technology company would.
Yeah, absolutely. We interviewed Julia Lane a couple of months ago on If Data Could Talk, and she talks at length about that corporation government difference. Really fascinating. So tell me a little bit about the job of the Data Foundation and the coalition. How is the work you are doing hoping to assist the administration as they settle in?
Sure. So we both work on we have an initiative, the Data Coalition Initiative, which focuses on some more advocacy and outreach towards the administration as well as Congress. So there's a couple of really important things that we focus on. And one of them is the implementation of the Foundations for Evidence-Based Policymaking Act. It was great when this passed, but as some people know, that legislation getting passed is sort of the starting line and not always the finish line. So working with agencies to enact some of those provisions, including appointing a chief data officer, establishing a program inventory, a data inventory. We were really working with agencies and the Office of Management and Budget to make sure they have the resources, and connecting them with knowledgeable stakeholders to help them through that. There's also some really exciting legislation coming through Congress right now, the Health Statistics Act, which would establish both a pilot data linkage program as well as establish some data standards for health reporting, was recently reintroduced. The Financial Transparency Act, which would also set some digital standards and structured data reporting for investment firms. So a lot of what we're focused on is really just making sure that data is accessible and open. And there's a lot of things that we can do to make sure that happens.
Yeah. And again, these parallels just hit me every time, because again, you're describing what we at Tableau know our customers face as a struggle every day. It's like, we can say we're going to change the data, yay. And then you think, well, there's reluctance and there's hurdles and there's a willful ignorance, and then there's just unwillful, there's just, we don't know what we don't know. So there's so many challenges. And yeah, it takes, I mean, we see it with our customers all the time. It takes years and years and years of hard work to change. So hopefully we'll get there, right? And I think the work you're doing,
and I think as we see more and more success stories coming out of agencies, there are some interagency bodies like the CDO Council that can really share some lessons learned. Right. And hopefully that can help drive some culture change, and people can really see how this isn't a box ticking exercise. This is something that can really help serve your mission and program delivery. Yeah, sounds great. Right, now, I also want to talk a little bit about you in our last question, because you've got, as I was researching this interview, I looked on your LinkedIn and you mentioned beekeeping. Now, and I now know, because we've spoken before, that you've got a really interesting career path. You work in data. You started looking after bees. What happened there? And the reason I want the audience to know this is that, a path to a career in data can take many, many routes. And I think you've got a great one. So bees, how did you go from bees to here, Corinna? It's kind of a funny story, but I don't have any technical background in data. I took one statistics class in my graduate school program. So I always want people to know that you don't have to be a data scientist, a technologist to really invest in data. But how the path from beekeeping to data was a little bit, around the garden path. But as I was, there's a lot of challenges to the health of honeybees. And in the Farm Bill, there were pollinator protections that were being legislated about. And so I and a couple of trade groups of other beekeepers were really working with legislators, both on the federal level and in my home state of Minnesota, about putting in protections for bees. And as I was getting into it and we were drafting these policies and thinking about what it was, all of the policies were based around what we knew honeybees were doing. Well, honeybees are only one of thousands of pollinators, and they're not even a native species to the United States. So, I kept thinking, yes, I love the honeybees, but why are these interventions being planned around them and not a more comprehensive assessment of what pollinators needed? And the answer was we had data. We had the data on honeybees because they're a managed population. They're sort of like these charismatic little representatives. Like, everyone loves to learn about them. They're so fascinating. But that lesson always stuck with me, that when you have data, you can make really good policies that respond to that. And if you don't have the data, you can't. And that lesson is really something that has sunken into the heart of me. So when, as I moved through my career and became more involved in legislation and advocacy, really seeing the impact that data could have as we make these policies became so readily apparent that I feel like in a roundabout way, I can help the bees by making sure we have good data about pollinators going forward. And that's the analogy I take to my career now. Well, I absolutely love that. I think, it's just great. From that, you take away no technical background in data. There are technical careers in data, but your motivation is to ask and answer evidence-based questions, right? That's the clarion call that's key to Tableau's mission: help people see and understand data, and that's all people. So I love that story, and let's hope we can save all the bees, not just the attractive, friendly ones, because they're all important, right? Well, look, let's wrap up this section and move on in a moment to what you've been reading and watching and listening to. So thanks for answering those questions. Really, lots of great information. Obviously, challenge for government, but the same challenges our customers face. So appreciate that a lot. Let's take a moment before the next section. All right, Corinna, we are back. And in this section, we gave a little tease in the previous bit. We like to look at something each of us are reading, watching, or listening to that is relevant to a data curious audience. You can go first this week. What's on your bookshelf or movie shelf? So right now I am actually rereading for the third time a book by Carolyn Criado Perez called Invisible Women, which examines gender bias in our underlying data. And the author does an incredible job of examining how the underlying data that we have that make inform our decisions on almost every level of society often don't include women, and that there are really huge consequences to that. I think one of the most easily understood example is heart attack symptoms, that how many women have unfortunately lost their lives because doctors have a standard of care that is informed by a default understanding of men experiencing heart attacks. So there's tons of examples from ones that are as heavy as that to, you know, personal protective equipment. And to me, it's so important and such a good reminder for those of us who do believe in data that it's not enough to critically engage with the analysis and the results of data, but to critically engage with how the data is being collected, because it's not in a vacuum, and that it's something that needs to be considered at almost every level.
It's it's an astonishingly good book. I mean, the heart attack example, you know, the symptoms for men and women are just completely different, right? You know, men have chest pain here and women have abdominal pain. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, right. So they're completely different symptoms. You know, that, and then I've seen, you know, I follow her on Twitter, and sometimes she calls out certain things. She's like, look, this is an example. And it's been really good for me to challenge my own biases. You know, I'm a gray-haired white man, right? And because of a couple of examples she's called out, my first reaction has been, well, that seems reasonable. But then it's like, no, actually process this. And you're like, oh yeah, so it's been really useful for me. You know,
yes, she also has a great newsletter that you can find on her website if anyone is interested. I would highly recommend it, because again, it is just a reminder of all of these examples of, you know, it feels like an instance of constant vigilance, but, you know, there's some really high stakes here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, mine is, it seems a bit more trivial after that one, but it's an article by Olaf Hoverfault, and I hope might have got his name wrong, but he's quantified everything he's been wearing for the last 3 years, right? So he's basically quantified his wardrobe, and this piece is fantastic from many levels. First of all, the level of dedication to track the thing he's wearing. He says it only takes me a minute each day, but he did write 3,000 lines of code in R and write a Google form in order to do it. So I'm like, well, it may be a minute a day, but you've dedicated time, so that's great. Then it's just all these insights from the clothes you wear. You know, do you actually stop and quantify how many times you wear your jumper or a t-shirt or your underpants or your shoes? And so he's got all these discoveries about, well, some of his shoes cost quite a lot per wear because he's only worn them a few times. He tends to wear a t-shirt 25 times before he throws it away, which I don't have my own data. I feel like my t-shirt wear is way higher than that. I don't know, but maybe that's just me. But yeah, that's a good piece. Did you check it out?
I absolutely loved it, because I feel like this is what I want to do. And I would be very interested in the sort of analysis of how large your wardrobe is overall. You know, because if you have a smaller wardrobe, you're repeating wear.
Yeah.
Is there a benefit to having like a critical size of a wardrobe to maximize length, or, you know, is it better to have a small consolidated? So there's a lot of questions that came up.
They're profound questions, Corinna. You're right. So now we need this project repeated amongst a bigger population of people, right? Because I don't know how big his wardrobe is. I think he does quantify that, actually. But
I think we could probably write a grant for this. So
all right, let's do that. And if anybody wants to help us, then give us your data on your clothes. You know where to follow us, right? Brilliant. Anyway, go check that out. Do read Invisible Women if you haven't. It really is a good book. And with that, Corinna, I just want to say thanks so much for your time today, giving us an insight into your work and some of the challenges, the data-related challenges the administration are facing. So everyone still watching, before you go, we are broadcasting this in Black History Month, and Tableau's been doing a bunch of things to support Black History Month. We've got a data plus diversity event looking at the visualization works of W.E. Du Bois, who was a legend and a pioneer in this field. So go check that out. Links will be below. Our community equity task force have curated a collection of visualizations on Black history and issues. Check that out. Viz of the Day and our Tableau Public special featured authors have been looking at Black history for the last month. And we have a Salesforce Fireside celebration chat. There'll be emails from Salesforce about that if you subscribe to them. So go check those resources out. That's a lot of things to click and link on, Corinna. People are going to be busy for days as a result of this, don't you think?
Yes, great.
Yeah, excellent. All right. Well, with that, do let us know if you have any comments or questions. I've really enjoyed this chat, Corinna. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you all next time on If Data Could Talk. Goodbye.
Thank you so much.